Imagine sitting in a diner when suddenly a war veteran, an old man who once risked his life for freedom, is slapped, humiliated, and left in silence. No one dares to stand up for him until a stranger rises from the corner. But this isn't just any man, it's Keanu Reeves. What happens next will leave the entire room speechless and the world remembering a hero long forgotten. Imagine this: a quiet afternoon in a small-town diner, the kind of place where time seems to move a little slower. The booths were shiny red leather, polished from years of use, and the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon floated through the air. Locals gathered here every day: farmers, mechanics, young couples, and retirees, all chatting casually, enjoying the comfort of routine. The jukebox hummed softly in the corner, and spoons clinked against ceramic mugs. It was ordinary. It was safe. Or at least, it seemed that way. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The easy chatter faded into silence, replaced by a tension that gripped the air. All eyes turned toward a corner booth where a confrontation was unfolding. At first, no one could believe what they were seeing. Actor Keanu Reeves, known worldwide not only for his blockbuster movies but also for his reputation as one of the kindest men in Hollywood, was standing face to face with someone who looked far too fragile to be in such a situation. It wasn't a celebrity greeting a fan. It wasn't a friendly exchange. It was something darker. The man sitting in the booth was an elderly gentleman to 81 years old, his age written across the deep lines on his face. His army jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, a silent reminder of a time when he had been strong, fearless, and willing to risk everything for his country. This diner was his sanctuary. Every day he came here to sip coffee, read the newspaper, and greet the familiar faces who knew him simply as the veteran. Keanu Reeves stood over him, his jaw tight, his hand clenched. With a swift motion that left everyone stunned, he raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap across the veteran's face. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Cups rattled on their saucers. A young woman gasped loudly. A man in the back muttered, "No way." Did that just happen? The old man's head turned with the impact, but he didn't retaliate. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, his weary eyes meeting Keanu's with a mix of shock and sorrow. Instead of anger, there was something deeper, a quiet, unspoken question. Why? A woman sitting nearby dropped her coffee cup, the porcelain shattering against the floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. The waitress, who had been carrying a tray of burgers, stood frozen mid-step, her mouth slightly open. A teenage boy whispered to his father, "Dad, isn't he supposed to be a hero?" The veteran raised his hand slowly, palms outward, showing he meant no harm. His body trembled slightly, not from fear of pain. He had endured worse on the battlefield, but from the humiliation of being struck in public by someone younger, stronger, and idolized by millions. For him, the slap was more than a sting on his cheek. It was a blow to his dignity, to his service, to his lifetime of sacrifice. And in that moment, the diner wasn't just a diner anymore. It had become the stage of a story none of its customers would ever forget. The old man sat there in silence, his weathered hands resting on the table until the slap landed. His head jerked slightly from the impact, but his body remained still. Dressed in a worn army jacket, its patches faded and frayed, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much in life to be rattled easily. That jacket was more than just clothing. It was a symbol of the years he had spent in uniform, of the battles he had survived, of the brothers he had lost along the way. His eyes, deep and tired, carried the weight of decades of service. They were the eyes of someone who had marched across foreign soil, who had heard the roar of artillery, who had seen young men never return home. They were eyes that had once been filled with fire, but now, after 81 long years, They reflected only wisdom and weariness. Instead of rising in anger, the veteran slowly lifted his hands, open palms facing forward, a universal sign of peace. His movements were steady, deliberate, showing no intention of resisting or fighting back. There was no defiance in his posture, only acceptance. Acceptance of the insult, acceptance of the humiliation, acceptance of the fact that he was too old to fight battles with his fists anymore. The slap was not just physical, it was a wound far deeper. It wasn't merely the sting on his cheek. It was the insult carved into his very identity. Every wrinkle on his face was a reminder of sacrifices made, of sleepless nights on cold battlefields, of choices that cost him dearly but protected others. Every scar hidden beneath that jacket told a story of courage and pain. And in an instant, all of that was dismissed, diminished by a single careless act. The diner gasped collectively. Forks froze mid-air, conversation stopped mid-sentence, and the familiar hum of background chatter evaporated. A woman sitting near the counter dropped her coffee cup, the porcelain shattering loudly against the tiled floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. The crash of glass was nothing compared to the echo of that slap. People stared in disbelief. Keanu Reeves, the man admired for his kindness and humility, had done something so unthinkably cruel. The contradiction was almost too much to process. This was the man who fans said gave away his wealth quietly, who rode the subway with ordinary people, who was known for his gentle spirit. Yet here he stood, having humiliated an old soldier who had once fought for everything people in that very diner took for granted. And the question hung heavy in the air, whispered in disbelief by those who had seen it. How could someone so admired do something so cruel? The answer didn't come right away. Instead, it lingered in the stunned faces of the customers, in the trembling hands of the waitress gripping her tray, and in the broken dignity of a man who had given his country everything, only to be repaid with humiliation in the twilight of his life. The diner, once alive with cheerful conversation and the clinking of cutlery, had transformed into something entirely different. The warmth that usually filled the air was replaced by a chill, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the shock of what had just happened. Moments earlier, people had been laughing about small-town gossip, kids had been fighting over French fries, and a waitress had been humming along with the jukebox. But now, silence wrapped around the room, broken only by hushed whispers, uneasy, trembling, and uncertain. Why would he do that? A woman near the counter whispered, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the tables around her. "That's Keanu Reeves, isn't it? The movie star?" Another replied, her tone a mix of confusion and disbelief. Heads turned in every direction, people sneaking glances at the corner booth while pretending to look down at their plates. Some held their coffee cups midair, forgetting to sip. Others leaned closer to their companions, whispering questions that had no answers. Nobody dared to step in. It wasn't that they lacked sympathy for the old man. Everyone in the diner could feel the sting of that slap, echoing in their own hearts. But the weight of celebrity, the shock of the situation, and the fear of making it worse kept them rooted to their seats. Keanu Reeves wasn't just any man. He was larger than life, a face they had seen on billboards, movie posters, and late-night talk shows. To confront him felt unthinkable, even if he was the one in the wrong. At the booth, the veteran lowered his head, staring down at the table as though it could somehow shield him from the eyes burning into his back. His pride was hurt more than his face. The sting on his cheek would fade, but the humiliation, that would linger. This was a man who had stood tall on battlefields, who had endured the deafening roar of artillery and the suffocating silence. After losing brothers in arms, he had faced enemy lines, starvation, and the crushing weight of responsibility. Yet somehow, in this small diner, surrounded by people half his age, This single moment of disgrace cut deeper than all of it. Still, he said nothing. His silence was deafening. It wasn't weakness, it was restraint. It wasn't cowardice, it was control. But to everyone watching, the quiet only made the moment heavier. The veteran's refusal to respond turned the spotlight back on Keanu's action, making it impossible to dismiss or excuse. Maybe it's a misunderstanding? Maybe they know each other? But no explanation seemed to fit. The man sitting there was old, frail, and undeserving of such treatment. And the man standing above him, a Hollywood star celebrated for his kindness, now looked like a stranger. And as the old man sat quietly, staring at the floor, every person in that diner carried the same thought, unspoken yet heavy in their hearts. This wasn't just a slap to him. It was a slap to all of us. The slap echoed in the diner long after the sound had faded. Keanu's hand trembled, not from regret, but from the storm of emotions crashing inside him. He looked at the old veteran, whose dignity had been crushed in front of everyone. Keanu took a step forward, his voice low but firm. "Sir," he said softly, "you faced more battles than any of us could imagine. Don't lower your head because of him." The veteran looked up, eyes moist but still proud. Keanu turned, his gaze locking onto the arrogant man who had caused it all. The tension in the room thickened. The other diners shifted uneasily, their whispers now silenced by the gravity of the moment. The man smirked, trying to brush it off. "What, you're going to lecture me now? You're just an actor." The entire diner broke into applause, their fear dissolved into admiration. The arrogant man's smirk faltered. Suddenly, he was the smallest person in the room. The veteran, his voice trembling, whispered, "Thank you, son." Keanu placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "No, sir." "Thank you." The diner, once heavy with silence, now carried a new energy. The applause wasn't just for Keanu, it was for the old man who had been dishonored, and for the reminder that respect must never die. The arrogant man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to reclaim his bravado. "You all are acting like he's some kind of hero. He's just an old guy who couldn't keep up. You don't see a hero because you've never known sacrifice," Keanu said, his words deliberate, each one hitting harder than a fist. "This man has walked through storms you couldn't even stand in. He's bled so you could sit here and run your mouth. You owe him your freedom, your comfort, even your arrogance." The diner grew silent again. The arrogance on the man's face melted into shame. His hand trembled as he picked up his coat and left, his head lowered, unable to meet the eyes of anyone around him. The veteran sat frozen, tears sliding down his weathered cheeks. His hands, rough and scarred from years of service, shook as he tried to speak. "No one's even stood up for me like that," he murmured, his voice breaking. Keanu knelt down beside him, eye to eye, lowering himself as if to say, "We are equals." "You stood up for all of us once," Keanu said gently. "This is the least I can do," timidly, clutching a notebook and a pen. "Sir," he said shyly to the veteran, "can I have your autograph? My dad says heroes deserve to be remembered." The old man blinked in disbelief, then smiled through his tears. His hand trembled as he signed the boy's notebook, and for the first time in years, his shoulders straightened with pride. The diner erupted into applause once more, at this time louder, fuller, a standing ovation for a man who had carried the weight of a nation on his back. Keanu placed a steady hand on the veteran's shoulder and whispered one final truth: heroes don't fade. They just need someone to remind the world who they are. The old veteran sat taller than before, his chest rising as though he had finally remembered what it felt like to be honored. His eyes, though watery, glowed with a pride that had long been buried under years of silence. Keanu guided him gently out of the booth, helping him to his feet. The entire diner, every man, woman, and child, stood and parted to make way. People reached out, shaking the veteran's hand, clapping his back. some even saluting with tears streaming down their cheeks. The veteran looked around, overwhelmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years. I thought the world forgot." Keanu's voice rang out, calm yet firm. "The world only forgets when we allow it to. Tonight we remember." The moment was electric. Someone began to sing softly, almost trembling at first, the words of an old patriotic hymn. Within seconds, others joined in, and soon the entire diner was filled with voices rising in harmony, surrounding the veteran like a protective shield of love and honor. The arrogant man who had insulted him lingered outside the glass doors, watching from the shadows. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his reflection staring back with shame. For the first time, he understood his cruelty had been small, but the man he tried to belittle was greater than he'd ever be. Quietly, he turned and walked away, humbled. Inside, the hymn faded, leaving only silence and the sound of quiet weeping. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was of his own father, a soldier who had passed away long ago. He placed it gently in front of the veteran. "My dad wore the uniform too," Keanu whispered. "He never came back home, but when I look at you, I see him. I see all of them, and I swear to you, I'll keep telling your stories. I'll make sure no one forgets." The veteran's hand trembled as he touched the photo, his voice cracking. "Your father. He'd be proud of you, son." The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, Keanu helped the veteran back into his seat, sliding the money closer once more. But this time, the old man didn't resist. He simply nodded, accepting it not as charity, but as a symbol of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered again, but this time the words carried weight, dignity, and peace. Keanu gave a small, humble smile. "No, thank you for giving us a world worth living in." The diner's neon sign flickered in the window as the night deepened outside. Yet inside, no one wanted to leave. They had witnessed something rare, something powerful. The moment a forgotten hero was brought back into the light. And for the rest of their lives, none of them would ever forget it. The diner doors swung open, and the night breeze rushed in. Keanu stood tall beside the veteran, who now seemed transformed, no longer the humiliated old man but a living monument to courage. His shoulders were squared, his eyes fierce yet kind. Everyone in the room knew they were in the presence of greatness. Suddenly, the manager of the diner, a middle-aged woman with kind but weary eyes, stepped forward. She carried a framed photograph dusted off from the back wall. It showed a group of soldiers, young and strong, standing together in black and white. "Sir," she said softly to the veteran, "this picture has hung here for decades. My father used to point to you in it. He said you saved his life overseas." Gasps spread through the crowd as she held the frame higher. There, unmistakably, was the same man, only younger, in uniform, standing with his brothers in arms. The veteran's hand covered his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief. Memories flooded back, memories of gunfire, muddy trenches, brothers lost, and battles fought. For so long, those memories had been his burden alone. But now, in this diner, the truth came alive before everyone's eyes. A young girl stepped forward, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from outside. She held them out with innocent sincerity. "Thank you for being brave," she said in a trembling voice. The old man's lips quivered as he accepted the flowers, pressing them gently to his chest. His voice cracked, but this time with pride. "All my life, I wondered if it mattered. Tonight, I know it did." Keanu placed a steady arm around him and addressed the room. His voice rose, rich with conviction. "Heroes don't wear capes. They don't stand in the spotlight. They walk among us quietly, carrying scars we'll never see. But it's our duty, our responsibility, to honor them while they're still here." The diner erupted with applause so thunderous it rattled the windows. People were crying openly, some saluting, others simply bowing their heads. At that moment, a news reporter who had stopped for coffee stood up with a camera. "The world needs to see this," he whispered. Within minutes, the story was streaming live, spreading far beyond the four walls of that humble diner. Outside, strangers gathered, drawn by the sound of clapping and singing. The street filled with people, neighbors, travelers, even passers-by holding candles, phones, and flags. They pressed against the glass, wanting to honor the forgotten soldier. The veteran looked out at the growing crowd, his tears shimmering under the neon glow. For decades he had lived in silence, invisible to the world. But tonight he was seen. He was remembered. He was celebrated. And standing beside him, Keanu Reeves whispered the words that would echo forever. "Tonight, the world remembers you. And it always will." The next morning, the diner that had once been just a small roadside stop became the heart of a story spreading across the nation. News vans lined the street, reporters scrambled for details, and crowds continued to gather, holding signs that read, "Thank you, hero, and we remember." Inside, the old veteran sat at his usual corner table, but everything was different. No longer invisible, he was surrounded by strangers who treated him like family. Children brought him drawings of soldiers, parents thanked him with trembling voices, and other veterans, some in wheelchairs, some with missing limbs, came just to shake his hand. Keanu sat quietly beside him, not seeking the spotlight, just making sure the man never faced it alone. "Why are you doing this for me?" the veteran finally asked, overwhelmed. Keanu smiled softly. "Because once upon a time, someone did it for me. And because the world needs to see what real heroes look like." Later that afternoon, a limousine pulled up outside the diner. Out stepped a decorated general, his chest gleaming with medals. Cameras flashed as he walked straight to the veteran, snapping to attention with a sharp salute. "Private First Class Daniel Hayes," the general said loudly, his voice carrying through the diner. "On behalf of this nation, I thank you for your service. You may have thought you were forgotten, but today and forevermore, your name will be remembered." The diner erupted in cheers as the general pinned a shining medal to the veteran's chest. Tears streamed down the old man's face, his hands trembling as he saluted back. The weight of years of silence and loneliness seemed to fall away in that single moment. But the surprises weren't over. From the back of the crowd, a man in his 70s stepped forward, his face lined with age but lit with recognition. He carried an old, faded photograph. "Danny?" he whispered. The veteran froze, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "Tommy? Tommy Miller?" The two men stared at each other, both trembling, before embracing in a fierce hug. They had fought side by side in a war half a century ago and thought each other long gone. The crowd erupted again, many openly sobbing at the reunion. Cameras captured every second as two brothers in arms, separated by time, were brought back together by fate. Keanu stood back, watching the moment unfold with a quiet smile. He didn't need to say anything. His heart was full just seeing the veteran's life transformed before his eyes. For the first time in decades, Daniel Hayes was not just a forgotten soldier. He was a hero, a brother, a symbol of resilience. And it all began with one slap in a diner and one man's choice to stand up when no one else would. Days passed, but the story refused to fade. What happened in that small roadside diner had spread like wildfire across social media, news channels, and word of mouth. The image of Keanu Reeves standing beside the veteran, his hand on the man's shoulder, his voice declaring, "Heroes don't fade," was everywhere. Soon, the White House reached out. Invitations poured in from schools, military academies, and organizations that had once overlooked men like him. The forgotten soldier had become the face of remembrance. But the veteran, Daniel Hayes, remained humble. Sitting in his modest home, flowers sent by strangers filling every corner, he said softly, "I don't deserve all this. I just did my duty." Keanu, sitting across from him, leaned forward with a steady gaze. "Exactly, sir. That's what makes it beautiful. You never wanted recognition, but you deserve it because true heroes never ask to be remembered. That's why we must." One evening, a special ceremony was held at a packed auditorium in Los Angeles. Thousands gathered: celebrities, veterans, school children waving flags, and everyday people who had been touched by the story. The stage glowed under golden lights as Daniel, frail but dignified in a crisp suit, was escorted by Keanu himself. As he walked onto the stage, the entire audience rose to their feet in a roaring standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Some saluted, others clapped until their hands were raw, and many wiped tears from their faces. Daniel stood at the podium, his hands trembling, but his voice steady. "I am no hero," he began. "The heroes are the ones who never made it home. But if my story reminds you of them, then I accept this honor in their name." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, chanting his name, "Daniel! Daniel!" Then, as if fate itself had written the moment, the large screen behind him lit up with live footage, hundreds of veterans from across the country, connected via video stream, saluting him all at once. Old comrades, new generations of soldiers, even families of the fallen together, they honored the man who once thought the world had forgotten him. Daniel's knees buckled under the weight of emotion, and Keanu caught him, holding him steady as the Medal of Honor was placed around his neck. The moment was immortalized in photographs, headlines calling him the forgotten hero who taught the world to remember. Outside, thousands more stood with candles, their flickering flames lighting up the night sky like stars. The streets echoed with a single chant, "We remember. We remember." For Daniel Hayes, it was more than recognition. It was redemption. For the first time in his long, quiet life, he no longer felt invisible. He was seen. He was celebrated. He was remembered. And in that moment, under the lights and applause, he whispered the words only Keanu could hear. "Thank you, son, for giving me back my life." Stories like this remind us that real heroes often walk among us, unseen and unheard. If this touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share this story, subscribe for more powerful moments, and join us in keeping their memory alive. Until next time, remember, heroes never fade.